take a look at some of the top stories out of the region. Now, Nigeria's economy grew 6.56% in the first quarter this year. That's up from 6.34% in the same period in 2012, but down from 6.99% in the last quarter of 2012. Now, the National Bureau of Statistics says oil output from Africa's biggest producer averaged 2.3 million barrels per day in the first quarter. Now that's up from 2.1 million in the previous quarter. Consumer inflation rose 9.1% year on year in April. That's up from 8.6% in March. Now joining us on the line from Abuja is the Statistician General of the National Bureau of Statistics, Yemi Kale. Yemi, it's great to have you on the show with us. Let's start with the GDP numbers. As expected, we're seeing a recovery in GDP. A bit surprising that the non-oil GDP is growing a slower rate than last year. So can you talk us through the factors that you are seeing that are responsible for this?
Thank you for having me. Firstly, the oil production did not grow from 2.1 to 2.2. It actually went down from 2.5 million barrels a year to 2.2. So just to correct that. What we are seeing in GDP numbers is a slight recovery in the agricultural sector, which had been having some issues in the last few months. So we are seeing a bit more recovery, largely as a result the fact that many of the security challenges that we are keeping the sector from growing properly have slowly been having less of an impact on the sector. Also, a lot of the initiatives by the Agricultural Ministry beginning to kick in. We also see we had very strong performance from building and construction sectors, as well as continuous strong performance by the hotels, restaurants, real estate, which was the manufacturing sector, which also grew strongly. The telecommunication sector, on the other hand, did not perform as much as it has done in recent times, largely as a result of disruptions in infrastructure, stronger competition among players. So basically, what we've seen here is that the economy is still very resilient, and as unfortunately as some of the sectors that were lagging previously have been improved, we are getting some more challenges in others. Otherwise, it looks like as if the country would easily have the potential to move into double digits very, very easily.
So do you anticipate a greater contraction in oil GDP in the second quarter?
Well, from the numbers we have so far, although our second quarter numbers are not out, but from the indications of our monthly data, it's the output of from oil and gas has been, in terms of the number of the barrels of oil per day, has been coming down. I expect actually that since output is clearly been coming down for different reasons, and prices have made more or less stable, yes, I do expect a bigger contraction in the second quarter based on available evidence.
Now, of course, everybody's talking about the state of emergency in the north. So what, in your view, are the implications for the GDP?
Well, if you look at the way Nigeria is designed, we have agricultural production is likely in the north, and commerce, business, industry is likely in the southern part. So the greatest concern would be the agricultural sector. However, because agriculture is mainly in the rural areas. Now, these are not the areas that are subject to significant disruptions. Farmers in many of these areas have been allowed to go and to go on their farms. The conflict, wherever they are, not really affecting the local rural farmers who are, to an extent, immune from what is going on. The greatest challenge will probably be getting the raw materials that they need, the fertilizers and so on, which usually come from the south, into the north. But with the state of emergency, it makes it easier for many of these fertilizers, improved seeds to move around in those areas. So actually, it might not have as much of an impact on the agricultural sector. So it might improve prospects of the agricultural sector, actually. So I think it's actually a positive development.
Now let's move on to the inflation numbers. Let's move on to the inflation numbers. We've seen inflation for April rise to 9.1% from 8.6% in March. Do you think we could break 10% in the coming months?
I think it is largely unlikely, holding everything constant. Now, currently, the CBN has imposed a very aggressive monetary policy. The increase in fiscal prudence. Consumer demand is still quite muted. So it is unlikely, holding the current situation constant, that we'll move into double digits. Even if we do, it's probably going to be 1 or 2 months. But in my opinion, for the rest of the year, I expect that we'll stay within single digits.
Now, since we have you on the line, Yemi, can you give us a quick update on the plans to rebase Nigeria's GDP? We've heard that it's actually been postponed to 2014.
Well, yes. The GDP, the rebasing of GDP has become on a much larger scale. Now, initially, we were planning to rebase GDP without conducting 2 very key censuses, because we thought that our data from our surveys were sufficient enough to come up with very good numbers at the end of for the rebasing exercise. They still are, but our government is very enthusiastic that we get these numbers as accurately as possible. And these 2 censuses, one of agriculture and one of businesses, has been outdated for 17, 18 years. And our government was very enthusiastic and said we should go ahead and conduct these censuses to ensure that we get the most accurate numbers as possible. After all, it has been left for over 2 decades. Additionally, we are going to conduct 9 surveys in some areas where data is not as adequate. For example, the activities of non-governmental organizations, the activities of in the mining sector, for example. We want to ensure we get a much more advanced frame and more credible and reliable data in these sectors, which will help us to get a much better, accurate view of the real structure of the Nigerian economy currently. And that is why we delayed it.